Welcome everyone. My name is Paula Ahmad. I'm an Associate Professor of Film Studies and Chair of the Department of Cinematic Arts at the University of Iowa. It is my distinct honour to welcome you all today to recognise the outstanding achievements of University of Iowa alumni David Conley as we present him with the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Alumni Fellow Award. To begin, I would like to thank the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dean Shahdan Jalali, for supporting this important award that honours our distinguished alumni and by inviting them to campus enriches the experiences and learning opportunities for our students, faculty and the broader public. I would also like to thank a number of people who have been incredibly helpful in organising this event today. Jackie Albrecht, our departmental administrator, all of the faculty and students in the Department of Cinematic Arts, with a special thank you to our undergraduate and graduate student volunteers, including PhD graduate student Amos Staley-Young, who is teaching a course on special effects that we scheduled to coincide with David's visit, and undergraduate student Chris Butner, who's been so kindly taking photos. Thanks also to a number of other people from the college, including Nick Arp and Lisa Gray, for all of their help. It has been such a pleasure to host David, Melissa and Dashel Conley over the past few days, and we are sincerely grateful to David for his generosity in not only meeting with faculty and students during his visit, but in presenting two illuminating and inspiring talks. The first was focused on the business of visual effects, and the second on the artistry behind visual effects. The two are intensely and organically intertwined, and it was one of the most fascinating aspects of hearing those two talks side by side. The Department of Cinematic Arts has, at its core, the mission to offer students the best qualities of the liberal arts and sciences tradition, that is, the combination of a humanities-based approach to film studies and an arts practice approach to filmmaking. We aim to nurture students who see themselves as artists and scholars, creators and researchers. The contemporary visual effects industry, which David is at the innovative cutting edge of, probably requires more than any other field within globally popular cinema, the need for the sparks that fly when you combine the arts and sciences, and along with them, creativity and commerce, craftsmanship and technology, vision and advanced knowledge. Visual effects, that is the combination of real-life footage with hand-drawn or computer-generated imagery, is, in other words, a particularly apt profession as we think about the combinatory potential of students studying both the arts and sciences, cinema and computer science, English and engineering, classics and biology, storytelling and physics, just to give a few examples of the types of combinations that our students study while they're here. Visual effects are also profoundly important to exciting debates and creative work going on in film departments all over the world today, as we grapple with the challenges and opportunities of the digital revolution that have transformed the making, watching and meaning of movies today. And here just to give a very quick but important statistic, of the top 25 grossing films of the 21st century so far, 20 have been visual effects showcases like Avatar, etc. And the other 5 were entirely animated, films such as Frozen, for example. And yet, and this is why this wonderful image here is in front of us tonight, this revolution is part of a much longer evolution of an art form that has always involved technological transformation and the creative combination of film's connections to reality and its capacities for fantasy. And David and I might be speaking a little bit about that in our conversation to come. I just wanted to quickly show you this because I am a historian of film. And so here we have, to speak of one of the key features of Weta Digital, the studio that David works for, here we have one of the first motion picture camera and motion performance suits, okay? And it's a suit and a technology that speaks also to the technology that led to the birth of cinema. So as many of you will know, Etienne Jules Marais, the scientist, was doing motion studies that eventually contributed to chronophotographic serial studies that ended up leading to 24 frames per second projected onto a screen, which via the persistence of vision illusion creates what we understand to be the cinematic illusion. That technology, if you can just bear with me for 1 second, is absolutely still at the core of the most advanced motion capture performance technologies that are being used today by Weta, for example. And I will now stop lecturing. It's always tempting. Okay, as executive visual effects producer for Weta Digital, the company founded by the director Sir Peter Jackson, and that is at the forefront of the globalised digital effects industry today, David Conley has overseen the production of some of the most spectacular fantasy worlds in recent cinema. These are both poetic and scientifically grounded worlds that push the boundaries of the possible in cinematic representation. They are worlds in which an orphaned and shipwrecked Pai Patel cradles the head of a Bengal tiger, Richard Parker, in his lap. They are worlds in which Roald Dahl's 24-foot high, big friendly giant listens to the whisperings of the world and bottles its dreams. And they are worlds in which Elliot, the titular creation of Pete's dragon, comprised of 20 million digitally simulated hairs, is also able to vanish like a puff of smoke into the magical forest from which he emerges. As Robert Redford's character says in Pete's Dragon, and that we might offer as a commentary on the best of special effects cinema that is still rooted in the wonder of the real world, quote, "There's magic in the woods if you know where to look," end quote. These are just some of the recent films that represent the culmination of David's distinguished career in the motion picture industry. David's career builds upon extensive experience and success in some of the defining fields of contemporary popular cinema: genre cinema, independent cinema, and visual effects showcase cinema, in which he has worked both within the studio, model, and as an independent freelancer. After graduating from the University of Iowa in 1990, where he received his BA in Communication Studies, where film was then housed, he began his career as a production assistant to John Hughes, yes, the John Hughes of 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, etc. Then worked in Los Angeles on the independent film productions of Steven Soderbergh, on films like Out of Sight, The Limey, and Erin Brockovich, after which he joined Paramount Studios as an associate executive on visual effects showcases such as War of the Worlds and Beowulf, in addition to films from their independent division such as There Will Be Blood. That incredible range and versatility of experience and specialisation of skills and knowledge in visual effects production, coupled with his passion, patience for and insight into the creative process, led him to his current role as executive visual effects producer for Weta Digital, a company that is at the forefront of world-leading innovations in digital effects technology and in cinema, and perhaps, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you these two images today, perhaps most famous for its cutting-edge work on performance capture technology in films like Avatar and Planet of the Apes, etc., and others. I would like to now introduce and welcome the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dean Shardin Jalali, to present David Conley with the CLAS Alumni Fellow Award. Thank you, Shardin.
Thank you, Paula. You know, I had requested a suit like this in the background, a green background to add effects, but it was not. So it's my great privilege to welcome David Conley and his family on behalf of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Every year, our college, through its Alumni Fellow program, invite distinguished alumni to return to campus to share their life and career experiences with our students, faculty, and the public. David is one of the 3 alumni fellows this year. After hearing Professor Ahmad's introduction and my interaction, wonderful dinner last night with David, I can guarantee you're in for a treat. So with no further ado, David, our college is proud to count you among our most distinguished alumni, and I'm personally proud to present you with this plaque commemorating your visit as a 2017 College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Alumni Fellow. Oh, the light, yes. Special effects.
Okay, and so what we were hoping to do now is David and I are going to be in conversation. We're going to be sitting over here for about 20 or so minutes. I know that David would also like to start by very kindly screening a clip that really sort of showcases and features the work that's been done at Weta Digital. So we thought that we would start with perhaps it was the Valerian clip that you were thinking of showing, David, just to allow everybody to enter the world of visual effects. And then David and I are going to move into conversation with some questions, and most importantly, in about half an hour, so please stop me if I go on, because it's going to be difficult for me to stop, I know. But in half an hour, so at about 3:45, we want to stop so that the audience can ask questions of David. Okay? So I'm going to let David speak a little bit about and set up his clip that he's going to show.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dean and Paula. I really appreciate it's an extraordinary honor, and obviously I'm humbled by the presentation and opening remarks that you made. Certainly, it was a very kind reflection on my career to date. Thank you. I'm going to actually hire you in the marketing department, and you can write my bio. First, and I'd like to thank all the students and graduates and professors who are here. I appreciate your time. For those of you, for the students out there who've emailed me, please know that I get over 10,000 emails a day. I will respond to you sometimes. Might not be this weekend, it might not be next month, might be a year, but I will get it done. And I've used the fantastic technology of Tupperware to bring a number of business cards. So for those of you who are interested in emailing me at a later date, I do have some contact details for anyone who is interested. Moving on, I'd like to sort of introduce the Q&A session with just a general overview of the visual effects that we do at Weta Digital. As Paula said, I've been there for a while, and the company is at the forefront of visual effects technology and the interaction of tech and arts in cinema. So with that, just to sort of set the ambience, I wanted to give you just a general overview of some of the movies that we've been working on the last 4 years. For purposes, I have not brought any materials that are movies that we're working on currently that are in production, so feel free to videotape this session. I just ask that you don't put me up on YouTube. Thank you. What do I hit? Do I hit play, laptop? Oh, no, okay.
Oh, that is the nicest present that anybody's ever given me in my entire life.
So I asked our marketing department to throw in the clip about the BFG saying that was the nicest present as my special way of thanking you and Paula. So, and Deadpool, because yes, we all love Deadpool. Thank you.
So David, in our discussion about, as we were preparing for our conversation today,
Yes.
David and I looked at a couple of questions and we thought that we would start off with a really important question, and it's one that always fascinates me in speaking with all artists. And I wanted to ask you about whether you had any formative experiences or memories, given your career in the motion picture industry, with films. So if you can, or if it's interesting to you to talk about the memory of your first film, or of any film that profoundly impacted you and that you carry along with you in some way in the work that you do today.
So I've been attracted to film for my entire life. I've been immersed in cinema since a child. My parents, to be candid, were film studies professors at the University of Minnesota. So I had access to a number of films growing up. Pushing the boundary even further because they watched a bunch of boring Italian movies, silent movies, and I couldn't stand that. I checked out a number of films from the local public library at the time that had film noir and westerns, which were very appealing to me. And then I fell in love with Ray Harryhausen. And when I saw Ray Harryhausen's movies, I was determined to buy a Super 8 camera that had stop motion capability. And from then, at a very young age, I learned to make stop motion animation. Clay, paper, toilet paper, rolling downstairs, walking around the house, I did it all. So formative films there are too many to count as a sort of single piece that really informed me. It was a large body of films that inspired me over time. Films like King Kong really got me inspired at a very young age. And then I also, watching Wrath, I don't know, Clash of the Titans, was also a very big film for me. And I was in Europe as a student when a friend of mine back in those days sent me a snail mail, piece of paper that gets a stamp on it, and they send it to Europe, and I got it. And he kept telling me, there's this movie out in the States called Raiders of the Lost Ark. You got to see it, you got to see it, you got to see it. Well, 6 months later, I finally made it back to the States, and it was in the Dollar Theater up the street in Minnesota. And that's the movie that really sort of firmly blew me away when I started to think that the cinematic experience could really change the way we approached cinema. It really made the movie-going experience memorable. Shortly thereafter, I saw a movie called Blade Runner. And I was in a movie theater that was just above a subway, and the print was in French with subtitles. So every 10 minutes, it would just rattle this whole theater. But that movie, in spite of the fact that I couldn't understand anything they were saying, just visually blew me away. And so if I talk about some formative films, it would be those types of visual effects movies that really sort of grabbed me and pushed me into the direction that I wanted. And growing up in the Midwest, I had no understanding of what the movie business was about. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just kind of knew it was cool. I thought it was awesome. I've read voraciously animation magazines, books on industrial light and magic, but never thought I would ever have a career in filmmaking. So, yes.
Thanks, David. And then, it's fascinating to hear that, because you said that, you were from the Midwest and you felt that this was not a career to which you could aspire, as it were. And then you came to the University of Iowa and, when you were studying, a number of subjects and in communication studies where film was then taught, can you speak to us a little bit about, and I know you've already done this already, but can you speak to, the audience here today a little bit about, the types of courses that you were taking when you were studying here, and the range of courses and how they too have, and the education that you had, how it impacted the path that you took, even though you said you were in a position where you thought, well, filmmaking isn't something I could aspire to. What was it at the University of Iowa that, I don't want to claim that we that we were responsible, but were there elements of your education at the University of Iowa that put you on that path?
Absolutely. So when I first came to the University of Iowa, I was fortunate to join a program called the Unified Program, which at the time was a program that unified undergraduate studies with courses were often taught by professors. So it was a very comprehensive overview of classical literature, philosophy, art history, combined with sciences. While I was here under the tutelage of a professor by the name of Dudley Andrew and Rick Altman, Franklin Miller, and Leighton Pierce, shortly thereafter, after 1 or 2 years, I was encouraged to take a year abroad and go to the Center of Critical Studies in Paris, where I could actually learn directly from many of the theoreticians that I was reading here at the University of Iowa. So why not? I went and sort of did my critical studies in Paris. At the time, when I was a student here, the school made you do two things. They made you do film theory, boring, and film production, awesome. Problem is that film production, really expensive, hard on a student's budget. Film theory, well, if I'm reading about all these guys who are living in Paris, why don't I just go talk to them directly and get it over with? And I thought I was going to get it over with. I was going to be a year abroad. I go to Paris, and I sit in a room, not about this size, and they all go around the room, and they start introducing everybody. So where are you from? One arm after another. Yale, Harvard, Irvine, RISD, Yale, Brown, Harvard. Iowa. I was intimidated. I was really intimidated. But it didn't take long for me to sort of figure out, while these kids were far more better academically prepared than I was just as smart as them. And that's what I really took away from being in Paris. Then I started studying from a lot of the professors, and I had some really, really remarkable professors while I was in Paris. Came back to the United States, came back to Iowa, and from a lot of those courses, the professors that I had here unified and wrapped up all the education that I had learned, starting with the 2 years in the unified program, followed with a year in Paris, and I applied that to film production at that time. And so the thing for me was getting a really broad liberal arts degree here. I was a voracious reader, and there was, at the time, an art building just down the street where I took a significant number of art classes in an art museum where I learned an enormous amount about lighting, composition, and art history, which were all instrumental in what I think were building the foundations of preparing me for a career in the film business. So yes, that's what I...
And one of the things, that was also interesting to me to hear yesterday when you were speaking about the studies that you did at Iowa, and that also has been instrumental to the aesthetic and the artistry of the work that you're doing now with your teams at Weta, is that even though one might imagine that Weta is all about the digital and it's post-photographic, you stated again and again in your two talks how crucial the material, physical, scientific, optical understanding of cameras, lighting, etc., still is to the work that you demand of these artists as they create new realistic worlds. And you spoke about how some of the lighting equipment and cameras that you used here, and that apparently we still have in our cage,
Yes, you do.
were crucial to not just your formation, but that you believe that they're crucial now to the training of digital artists, as it were. Could you speak a little bit about that, David, as well?
Yes. I'm going to get comfortable and conversational with everybody here. So I'd like to say one thing about that. So what you guys saw, the brief opening here, was the summation of thousands of hours of art, thousands of hours of effort put in by not only software engineers, hardware engineers, research and develop associates from around the world, and craftspersons who are animation technicians, lighting technicians. They all work very much, they all have backgrounds grounded in science and art. And it is very important that everybody understand that the work that we do is grounded both in the realism of science and physics, as well as a deep discussion around the artistic efforts of our crew. To Paula's point, it's important that everybody understand that when we do art and we talk about art, art is not just a putting together of an image from a scientific point of view. We will start with that. There's some clips we'll start talking about a little bit later with Life of Pi, and this will become a bit more evident when we can actually see the pictures. But the foundation of art history, the foundation of being able to understand literature, and more specifically read, write, and talk about it, is probably the most fundamental foundation any artist really has working at Weta Digital. We start quite often with a piece of paper and a concept art, and in doing these discussions we reference countless of images, sculptures, statues, pieces of architecture, works of literature from around the world in order to help us inspire the work that we do. It's only once we translate at a conceptual level, then we go into a very technical level, and we have a number of scientists and engineers who help bring these sort of conceptual frameworks together. And then to finish it all off, then we have another layer of artists who understand the optics, the properties of optics, the properties of how light is transmitted through a spherical ground glass, and that is a camera. Even though we work in a digital environment, in a digital medium, you can't put together a picture unless you understand how light hits a camera and what its impact is as those light rays bounce through a piece of ground glass, and how it's then either caught on a sensor or captured in a 35 to 60, 75 millimeter print. You have to understand how light works in order to create these images. And not only do you have to understand the scientific component of it, but I highly recommend and I strongly encourage, and we discuss this on many levels, how light works as a narrative device, as an artistic tool. It is part of the brush that we use to create the image. And A Life of Pi is an extreme example, but those of you looking at even just films like Avatar, where we are using the realism of light, we are using properties of reflective light, how we study how light bounces off plants, how it interfaces, we call subsurface scattering, how light penetrates skin and bounces around inside of the skin in order to produce different effects. So these are all artistic and technical devices that ultimately tell the story or help create the image that tells the story.
And I just wanted to mention in relation to that, I titled this conversation, this afternoon, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. And that is, a quote from one of my favourite and one of the most beautiful poems in the English language by William Blake, 1794 poem. And it's a poem, Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? And in the last stanza, dare frame thy fearful symmetry. And it's an incredibly important poem in its particular context. It's about the awe-inspiring fear of God's creations for Blake, but it's also about, and it's one of the most famous poems that reflects upon the creative process itself as well. And so he's there thinking about himself as an artist. Now, I'm not going to compare you to God, but part of what a digital effects team does, and boy did we see this work, illustrated in your presentations yesterday. Part of what they do and can do, because they are a team that are drawing upon artists, physicists, mathematicians, biologists, technicians, coders. Part of what they do, even when they're building up a creature like Golem, is they are recreating a world. And as you said, it can be an awe-inspiring technology and process. So they're literally building cell by cell, hair by hair, leaf by leaf, pebble by pebble, these worlds. And I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about, because not all visual effects films have the same aesthetic, but you've spoken a lot, David, about the importance for the films that you've worked on of a realist aesthetic. And so that even when there are flights of fancy into the fantastical, that your image is beholden to real physics. Real properties of space and time and volume, etc. Could you and you use the example of what happens when you really want to simulate a crushed, banal plastic bottle, and then what you want to do as you try to simulate water moving in it. Could you speak about the life-building worlds that are going on day to day in a studio like Weta?
Yes, I don't know if we call ourselves gods, but I would say this: as a visual effects producer, and part of what has allowed me to be have some success in this industry was the fact that I work with directors very early on in the filmmaking process. Many times before a production designer or concept artist start. I often work directly with directors and the writers, and we collaborate to create the worlds in which they want to tell their movies. So why is that important? Well, it means that you have to have a very comprehensive overview of the world in which you're about to immerse yourself. There was a clip in there of King Kong. The thing that I want everybody, the thing that's important about that image is that we were building, we set the movie in 1933, King Kong. So 1933, New York. The thing is this: there are no architectural records of 1933 New York. So what did we do? Well, we had helicopters go over, scan. We talked to architects, civic codes, civic engineers to sort of replicate all the history. We then went to art history museums, called all the photographs of New York City, and then started to actually reconstruct from photographs, from aerial images, what the city looked like. Once we had that grounded framework, we realized that it would take far too long to have anybody be able to model the city. So we came up with a software program called City Engineer. And City Engineer, basically, it tells the computer, turn it on, you say, I need 1933 New York. These are the types of bricks that they use. These are the type of flower pots that were on on fire escapes, and these are the types of rain pipes that were used, and these are the architectural plans and photographs that we've called from city planners who have access to city archives. And we were able to then, over a 6-month period, the computer built New York, 1933 New York for us to a fairly accurate degree. Apparently we missed 2 buildings. But that is where suddenly we, as an executive producer, are starting to build worlds. We start to build environments, and our role effectively is to sort of view the filmmaking process in a in a comprehensive overview. And we have to look at it, the movie, not only from an aesthetic point of view, but we have to look at it from a technical and scheduling point of view, because I can dream up, along with any other director, some of the most amazing ideas. We can craft a really cool story, but somebody ultimately has to say, yes, I'll write that check for this. That's the hardest part. So once we get the check, the overall studio budget, this is the part that we, as visual effects producers, have to work on, which is we get to create what is called the spiritual part of the story, what I call the sort of the literary journey that you go through on every single movie, whether it is Life of Pi, which is an extreme metaphysical discussion, to another movie that we did, which is Reno 911, comedy, if you will. But all of these movies have what I've always pushed directors and filmmakers to have a sort of follow a lot of the sort of literary discussions, follow the literary paths that many of you probably are studying in class right now. You know, the journey of myth. You know, everybody familiar with mythology and the arc of the spiritual warrior and the spiritual. Yes. So we follow those. We craft every single narrative with those points in mind, and so that's the sort of creative discussion. And then we have to sort of arrive at a technical discussion, and that's the very mechanical. So to sort of tie this all together, it means that you have to have a very comprehensive understanding, a broad worldview, a broad scope of knowledge. But if you don't have the answer to something, you have to know how to find it. You have to know who to talk to get it. Because you never know, and you never have to, you can't stop learning. As a visual effects producer, you have to keep learning and finding out, sort of keep studying, keep reading, and keep watching more movies, because there's always another opportunity out there to be able to bring an idea to the table. But you also have to find out who's doing what, keep abreast of the latest motion capture technology. There's some kids in Budapest who've done some really remarkable facial technology now, which we're embracing. But around the world, people are doing some really amazing things. So from a God perspective, if you will, it's our role is to have a comprehensive overview of bringing, all the different components of a movie together.
And one of the things that's so interesting in the talks that you've given, David, also is that, we're all aware of this, a criticism that gets made of certain special effects film, where people will walk out of the cinema and they'll say, what was all of that for? What were those millions of dollars for? And you yourself critiqued one such scene the other day. And there's always been this, ongoing debate about, does special effects sit in opposition to narrative in these films? Yeah, and this is a really long debate within film history. So even, one of the early pioneers of special effects, Georges Méliès, writes a famous essay in the early 20th century in which he says, and he's here talking about Trip to the Moon, a film that I'm sure many people in here know, the narrative in that film was just the skeleton and the excuse for my special effects. Right. So he's very clear that for him, special effects were primary. You have adamantly, expressed over the past couple of days that in the beginning was the Word. And even in your presentation on Tuesday, where you did a breakdown of the script, as from the perspective of a visual effects producer, where you're having to think about the cost of each and every potential shot, you begin with the script. Could you speak a little bit about, the status of the script, the word, the narrative in the work that you're doing?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. To me, none of what we do as visual effects artists, producers, technicians is successful unless the script itself is successful. And it is that piece of paper, it is the story that ultimately counts. We are often approached by a lot of filmmakers to work on their films, and we read their scripts well in advance. And if we don't feel that the script is meritorious, we will politely pass on that project. And why is that important? Is because our work is a manifestation of the story, and scripts, be they 10-minute movies, 120-minute movies, 75 hours worth of Game of Thrones episodes, the script takes primacy, because the work that we do, especially at Weta Digital, is really about creating characters. And the creating of character and the creation of, whether it's a creature with wings or whether it's a human or a talking ape, is what we deliver back to filmmakers. So I think from a script perspective, it's important to understand that scripts themselves, the screenwriters that we like to work with and screenwriters that are out there are persons who have a deep knowledge of storytelling and a deep knowledge of dialogue and character writing. And it is incumbent as a visual effects producer to have a same appreciation and a same understanding, because as Paula said earlier, or alluded to, one of the classes we talked about the business of visual effects filmmaking. I have to be able to speak back to a filmmaker in a creative way that says, no, you can't have the plastic bottle of water in the shot, it's too expensive. I have to be able to sort of speak to them in a way that says, why don't we come up with this creative alternative, or here's a solution to solving your problems in a way that still allows us to finish the movie on schedule and on budget. I won't go into depth, but Ang Lee and I had legendary fights in the editing room on Life of Pi. And I think part of why he and I like to work together very well is that we have a deep appreciation of the importance of making the image have meaning. And it's, while we have we both love pushing the technical side of movie making, we come back to this idea of the story taking primacy, and we broke that story down to the finest of details. Clouds had character, reflections of water had character. So every piece, every artifact in any of the images that we produced on that movie, we had story behind it. And that comes from the piece of paper, and that comes from a deep understanding of how stories are told, ought to be told, can be told. And there are some groundbreaking scripts out there these days. I read one that is a story from inside a police car, the day in the life of a police car, and it's told through all the cameras, the different types of cameras that are inside a police car. I thought it was daring and inventive. So now getting back to the second part of your question, which is, our special effects, visual effects, at the current demise of the sort of filmmaking industry. No, I don't think so. I think the issue is that visual effects, when done well, become seamless and enhance a movie. And oftentimes, you just don't know that the visual effect is in there unless it's quite obvious, like our flaming gingerbread man who's about to stab you with a honed candy cane. That was one of our more fun movies to work on. But when the visual effects, we always blame the cottage industry of Marvel or Disney with their overemphasis on, sort of what we call superhero movie making and the ensuing visual effects that come with it. I think what we're what we're witnessing is a sort of a general fatigue, and I think a fatigue in the sense that a lot of the effects that we're seeing have a similarity to it. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm drawn to movies like Life of Pi, and we're going to be working on Aang's new movie. I won't talk about that one, but we endeavor as a visual effects facility to work with filmmakers who try and push the creative envelope, especially in storytelling.
And one of the interesting things about Life of Pi in that respect is also that it thematizes storytelling within the film itself. And so, you know, storytelling becomes an act of survival within the life cycle of this boy.
Yes.
And so by the end, and I hope I'm not spoiling this for people who have not seen it, but by the end, you know, where we realise that the film that we have watched was perhaps merely the sort of after image of a traumatic experience that this boy experienced, which is the real story. We then are confronted with two stories, and then he turns to his interlocutor and says, "You choose. Which story do you like the best?" And the guy says, "The one with the tiger," i.e. the one that we've just viewed. And it's a brilliant meditation and commentary upon you know, the dialectics of storytelling and belief and disbelief within the film itself. I'm keeping an eye on time because I promised I would.
Yeah.
And before we open it up to the audience, we were thinking that it might be interesting to also just show a clip from Life of Pi. It's a fascinating clip, which for me speaks again to one of the most interesting thematics of the film that you know, plays out in a number of Weta's films, and that is this relationship that these films are often exploring between the human and the non-human, between the animate and the inanimate, and between an interspecies exploration, in this case between the boy and the tiger. And so we're just going to show this clip. It's just about 2 minutes long, and it really sits at the metaphysical core of the film's explorations. Yeah? And then we can have you talk a little bit about it, and then we will absolutely open it up to everyone. So we've got it, Blu-ray.
Display.
And it's 21. Where's mine? Oh, here I am. Have I got 21 highlighted? Let me just see. Is 21 highlighted?
Here so I can see it.
Oh, it's 24 is, sorry. Okay. And we're ready. It's about 2 minutes long. He said, "Talk to me, tell me what you see." They're the only lines in this scene.
everything mixed up, fragmented. Can't tell daydreams, night dreams from reality anymore.
We can just end it there, and it's an incredible scene, David, for a number of reasons. So it exemplifies this, one of the central themes in the film, where it's exploring a type of potential for intercommunication between a human and an animal. That's the central conceit of the film. And so we enter the scene through the eyes of the tiger, and then we're going to exit it through the eyes of the human. And it continues this theme that, when he eventually will be abandoned by Richard Parker, the tiger, he'll mention, wasn't there more than just the reflection of my own eyes in his eyes? And so he'll again return to this issue of what happens when you look into the eyes of the other.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an incredible central scene in the film, but again, one that speaks to an ongoing exploration of human, non-human possibilities in a number of Weta's films. Is that something that...
Oh, no, it's absolutely a discussion point. First, I'm going to point out something really quickly. This shot here, the tiger reference was, took a video of a cat of ours by the name of Gilligan. She was sitting in the kitchen licking herself, and that was the inspiration for the animators. So just a complete side fact. But to your question, the scene that Paula just showed, you guys are calling it scene 21. I'm calling it scene 176. Tiger Vision is what we called it. Tiger Vision, this was one of, there were a couple of scenes in the book that were incredibly difficult to tackle. This was probably one of the scenes that we struggled with the most. And when I talk about we struggled, there was, Ang and I had a number of vociferous disagreements over the construction of the scene. What's important for this this is what Paula's mentioned here, is that yes, we had very deliberate debates about where Richard Parker was and where Pi is in his journey here, because it is at this critical component the first time, and it's the only time in the movie, where we have a full-on, straight-on shot of Richard Parker looking at and I forget Surge's character, Surge, who's the kid. It's the only time that the tiger looks straight at the audience, presumably straight at our character, and when you cut back, he's looking straight in the water. We fought over that edit for many, many moons. So this whole sequence, there's another additional component to it. This film was done in stereo native 3D, and they're at the beginning of the scene when Pi's looking into the water. We had to do what at the time was unachievable. It's a technical 3D effect where we had to do what's called dynamic convergence, and we pulled convergence on an object going through into the water, and we had to make the stereo seem seamless, but most importantly didn't break the retinas of our audiences watching the movie. But it was really important. We knew that we had to do it because the whole premise of this was that for us, this particular sequence is the first moment that the tiger and Pi are only alluded to as being the same person. And we carefully constructed all the sequences to keep the tiger apart or keep the tiger and Pi in separate components of the boat itself. So we had a very clean and easy line with the tarp. So the tiger's always either outside the boat and he's on the tarp, or tiger's underneath and he's on the tarp. This was the only time that they actually look at each other directly. So the camera itself, this is where we get into, this is the moment in the movie where Pi starts to realize that he is starting to figure out that the world at large, there was much more in the world, and his relationship to Richard Parker is that the Richard Parker is the demon inside of him that allows him to survive on this boat. But that demon, and we all have these demons, and this is a theme that comes through in a lot of Aang's films, is the relationship to that demon, and how does that person, that side of our self, help us survive, and in a world where we want to be moral, where we would like to have a code, an ethical code, but at sometimes that code, it gets violated. So for us, there was the technical challenge of getting the camera in there. We knew that editorial, so in there we used the reflection of the tiger in the eyes. We used Pi's performance. We also had a 3D stereo convergence to get the camera in over the boat into the water. Once we got it into the water, we used a company called Buff. They are a French sounding, they're a French company. They're no longer in existence, but they used to work out of Paris. They had run by a gentleman by the name of Pierre Buffin, and they specialized in creatures. So they were very helpful in designing a lot of these creatures. My particular contribution was the loggerhead turtle in there. I had to have a loggerhead turtle. But you'll notice in this particular scene, as it goes by, you see the fish on the top, and then it goes down. The camera then has to drop. We follow the journey of a squid that goes down, captures the whale. And here's the thing, right? I'm hoping everybody understands that generally the sperm whale is the one who emerges the victor in a fight between a sperm whale and a octopus or giant squid. Given that the squid is the sperm whale's food, but this was a sort of the representation of what we wanted to do to show the sort of the universe struggling with itself, the universe fighting, and that was a reflection of the internal state of Pi at the time. The animals break up. The image of the animals breaking up comes from a famous Hindu mural that was found at Angkor Wat. And it was a mural that Aang and I were attracted to, that has inside of the mural a number of creatures and animals. And this mural that was Angkor Wat was replicated at the zoo in Pondicherry, where the story takes place at the beginning of. And so we had to incorporate that mural as a concept of tying back to, there's a lot of Hinduist reference in the movie. Obviously, those of you who saw it probably picked up on it. But we wanted that to also, it was a mural that indicated the unity of all the animals, the unity of life, but by breaking it up, we were showing the fractured metaphysical state of Pi on the boat. So for us as a company, we explore these, we talk about this considerably, because the relationship of the creature to us is about before we actually build the biology, before we actually understand the scientific ambulatory functions of a creature like a T-Rex, we try to understand the character, and we understand the person who's engaged with that creature. So yes, we have a significant number of these discussions.
Okay. I'm sure that there are questions that are percolating amongst our audience here. So I know that we've got about, just under half an hour left, so I want to make sure that we hand it over to the audience in case there are questions. I'm sure there are. Garrett, please.
I have two little questions. I'd love to hear more about exactly what you and thought about the cutting.
Okay.
But another one, more private, I guess, and I didn't think it would come up, but amid the special effects in this wonderful scene is what I'm seeing increasingly in special effects movies, the almost digital breakup of the woman's face, almost a confession of the digital. It seems to me that designers like that. It sort of cues us in to what we're really watching. Do you have a thought on that confessional mode of
So
isolation?
that the confessional mode is, yes. I don't have a thought other than the fact that in this particular scene, one of the reasons why I'm frustrated with Aang, I'll tell you a little bit later, but the design of that was a very specific design. And we talked about, at the point in which we made this movie, the particle effects was just an emerging technical trend in filmmaking. And we wanted to explore and tie it back to the candle scene at the beginning of the movie, where they let all the candles afloat. And so when the candles break apart, we were trying to replicate that design with the scattering of the face. Why is the face of the mother important? Why is that important? Is that she's the through line throughout the movie. Where I had a big debate with Aang, there's a scene that's not in the movie that I wanted to have in the movie, kept pushing for it. It's where Aang is alone, he's on the raft, and he sings this song that's echoed by the music in that scene, where he says, "Happy birthday, mother." And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment that I feel complements the slap at the beginning of the movie when she slaps him, because that's truly the moment where he's confronted by the fact that, you know, the world doesn't follow the rules that he thinks they ought to follow, and that's the first moment where life is telling him that it's unfair. And so that's the reason why that image was chosen. But it was a combination of utilizing particle effects at the time, which were new, trying to get the image of the mother, and we wanted it paralleled to the first scene with the candles that are broken apart. So.
Other questions, please?
When studying like basic special effects, I don't know too much about it. I know like a little bit After Effects and like basic programs like that. What would you recommend like going in, someone that's really interested in it, what would you recommend like studying further? Like masking or something like that?
So you're talking about specific programs, right?
Right.
So my encouragement really is to understand Maya. Maya is probably the most general basic of all platforms. Okay, so from that you can build on anything. You can go into Motion Builder, you can go into any sort of motion capture cloud point data. You can study, you can create any type of image once you understand Maya. I will follow that up though. I will say this, don't confuse the need to study tech with the need to study how images and pictures are put together and how those stories are told. If you're working in a software program, it's real easy to push buttons. It's real easy to use slider scales, pull them up and down. We, as a company, understand that you are a person who's interested in the arts. If you come down and work at Weta Digital, you're going to go through a 6-month comprehensive training program on how to utilize our tools. But the most important impact that you'll have on those tools are the creative ideas that you bring to that shot. And the thing that everybody forgets is that we have 1,500 to 1,700 artists working at all times. And everybody contributes to the singularity of each unit. And the singularity of the unit is the shot, that single shot. So one person or one team of 10 to 25 people will work on a single shot. You have to understand what the narrative importance of that single shot is relative to the next one, relative to the one before. So my answer to you is study, learn about how those stories come together and what a story in a single image, what is the story that you tell and what do you bring to that? Whether it's somebody breathing fire, whether it's somebody knocking a bottle of water over, or whether you're bringing a dinosaur to life. That's important more important than tech is understanding how the impact of that story. One of the things, like working with Aang and working with Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson, they as filmmakers are profoundly and acutely aware of every single frame that they put together. And I always say to the artists, when we go into these meetings with them, you're going to just watch. You're going to hear them say, as directors, that's not the point of the shot. And the point of the shot is in the detail. And so if you understand how to make the point of the shot come to life, you can use any software you want. But it's important for me to make sure that you understand that is my recommendation to you, and I really think that that's the most invaluable. So any software that you study, probably the premium one would be Maya, because that gives the broadest overview of anything. But past that, focus on the grounding of what makes that shot come to life.
What do you think and know about the future of movie watching, and how can aspiring filmmakers prepare
All right. You're talking about an area that is a very sensitive discussion at present. Everybody's talking about the demise of cinema, nobody going to movie theaters, and da-da-da. Not true. So I don't see that there's a demise in cinema. I don't see that there's a demise in TV. I don't see that there's a demise in video games. I see that there's a proliferation of deliverables, of content deliverables, as I like to call them. I can make a shot for a movie, I can make a shot for a video game, I can make a shot for a piece in VR. We're all doing the same thing at the end of the day, is that we're telling a story. The demise is that the concentrated numbers of people aren't going to movies in the sort of large communal groups that they used to. And where studies are being done on a daily basis about emerging markets and patterns, viewership patterns. Women like horror movies, dudes like comic book hero movies, nobody likes comedies. I think that it's a fallacy. We are all watching more content than ever. There's so much content. I guarantee you, I know many of you probably have thousands of hours of TV stored up on your DVRs ready for binge watching, but you still don't have the time to find it. That tells me that there's so much content being made, we don't have time to actually watch it. And so I think at the end of the day, we're all going to be doing still the same thing. And I strongly encourage everybody, don't let all that discussion sort of deter you from a future in telling stories if that's what you wish to do. I think any medium, be it the iPhone, be it a big screen theater, be it a TV, we all like to watch movies in different ways. Now, in particular, my boss, Mr. Sir Peter Jackson, is part of a group called the Screening Foundation. And they are looking into developing a real-time, day-and-date delivery system where movies are then projected in the theater, projected on your TV, or projected on iPads and phones all at once, because he recognizes that everybody watches movies in a different way. Now, there's obviously a number of executives who are against that initiative, because for them, the primacy, the currency of the dollar is through the theater. The vehicle of the movie is through the theater, because it functions as a large advertisement, not only for the movie, but for a lot of the ancillary deliverables that come out of it. TV shows, books, toys, theme park rides. So I don't think that, I think the demise of cinema claims are an exaggeration, if I can borrow somebody else's phrase. Yes, sir.
Yeah, over the course of your career, do you feel like the advances in technology have made your job more of a challenge, or
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's made it more of a challenge, because I can't keep up at all. Every 6 months we have a new cyclical change, and that's why it goes back to your question. 25, 30 years ago, when I graduated, you know, we had Panavisions. That was Panavision Golds were the premium in cameras. Now you can barely, you know, nobody shoots on film anymore. So the role of technology is that it's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and so you have to understand what your relationship is to that. As a manager / CEO of a company, I have to understand the investment of tech versus the tech trends and how they actually produce images for my artists, and how I have to talk about terms that no artist likes to use. I have to use terms like efficiency, you know, modeled behavior. I have to look at labor resource planning. I keep all that in the closet, but it's all very part of driving. I have to look at tech, say I spend $10 million on a render wall. That's what allows us finally to produce a picture. The business acumen in me says, well, I need to make sure that I amortize that tech over 10 years, that $10 million. But the problem is this: in 6 months, that $10 million worth of computers is gone, right? Because there's Maxwell's law of computational doubles, and your processor gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the actual sort of technical components and the artistry behind the images that we're trying to produce, they become so great and so data dense that we're constantly trying to figure out how to upgrade hardware, software to meet those technical challenges. But it happens every 6 months. And again, to me, what is it the true answer to your question is this: you can't stop learning. You can't stop. You can't say, I've reached it, I've solved the problem, and sit still. The entertainment industry, the movie business, is like any other business where we rely on a relationship of creating the new constantly and feeding a growing audience. We always have to be evolving. We always have to stop, think about what's down the road 6 months, what's down the road 12 months. And you have to be content to say, oh, what I know now is likely not to be true in 6 months. I need to go learn. I need to find somebody who can explain it to me. I need to go find somebody who can sort of guide me in that process, or be that person who's willing to embrace and do that. I'm not Elon Musk, so I'm not that smart, but I definitely appreciate what he brings to the table in the sense that he really brings a passion and a team together. And he recognizes that tech evolves every 6 to 12 months. So.
I know we had Nina and then
Nina.
Steve. Nina, thank you.
You mentioned how the scene in life required the audience was many analysis elements. Like in doing your mural, I was wondering if the resemblance of characters in Avatar had anything to do, or if you know if they had anything to do with Hindu gods and other things.
That's a good question. So the challenge that Avatar faced was that to date, Gollum was the only digital creature besides Jar Jar Binks that had ever been designed. Mm-hmm. So the conceit was that the creatures, the Na'vi, had to be 14 feet tall. They had to be blue, and they had to have big cat eyes, and they had those pointy ears, and they had the tails. I still don't know what the names are, the thingamajiggies that plug into their horses. The inspiration behind the actual design is comprised by two things. Not only some of the Hindu avatars, but also the Maori gods. So the combination is you're seeing the aesthetic of the statues, but you're also seeing the Maori markers and the skin pigmentation based on tattoos from the Maori. And even the headbutt that they do, that is the Maori greeting. So that's the sort of source of inspiration for. But I want to tell you that the avatar ended up being 10 feet tall because the human actors looking at a 14-foot person go like this. So we had to alter the design of the characters to reflect human eye lines. And also, when you put a head on a 14-foot creature and then they touch their beloved Sam Worthington, whose head, even though he's built like a brick house, his head and her hand, it gets dominated. So we're like, oh yeah, this isn't a romantic scene anymore. So scale him down.
Steve?
David, you talked a lot about storytelling.
Yes.
And details. What if you could tell a story and initiate a project? What might that be? What idea would you have to initiate?
What idea?
Yes.
Wow. Well, Steve. Let me come back to you at 6 o'clock. I don't know. That's a really good question. My thing is this. There is, when I was here at the university, Jim Jarmusch was the rage. Mm-hmm. I fell in love with Jim Jarmusch and all his movies. And oddly enough, Dead Man, William Blake, is one of the characters, and he recites nothing but William Blake's poetry as his lines. I still go back to a lot of those sort of formative films that define me, and I still think that they resonate to date. Many of the films in New Wave, film noir, and the Jarmusch period, I would love to do a mishmash of those three. I really, if I get the opportunity, it would be great to do a science fiction film where we had jump cuts and had people talking to camera, and we did like a sort of down and dirty handheld low budget film like Breathless. So I don't know what that story would be, but the closest I ever got to it was Cloverfield. So when we did Cloverfield, that was an opportunity where JJ said, go ahead and let the camera be free. So I don't know what story I'd tell yet. It's a good question.
Anu, and then the gentleman in front. Thanks, Anu.
Hi, David. You've spoken about having a comprehensive education, having a liberal arts education,
Yep.
on natural sciences, literature, all of these things. I would love to hear you talk about the industry perspective on the lag there seems to exist between myth, the stories that we tell, the realization of the stories on screen, and technological know-how, or sometimes the limitations of technology. Like, for example, I'm thinking about alchemy as something that we've already, in the old stories about alchemy, right? And it's been realized on screen. And then you've got 2017 Nobel Physics Prize goes to people who've detected gravitational waves, and the neutron stars collide, and there's gold and platinum, right? And it's a visualization of that in like natural physics. You've got the natural sciences element to it. But I feel like I've already seen that in the movies.
Yep.
Right? And I feel like you would, as the kind of flag bearer of just visualizing special effects and thinking beyond what we know, I'm wondering how you deal with the lag in technology catching up to our imagination, or just...
It's a fascinating question. I've never really thought about that, but that is a fascinating question. It's interesting. So the birth of visual effects, digital visual effects, and so when I'm talking about computer-generated visual effects, started with Jurassic Park. And what's interesting is, to your point, when they built, the first time they built Sue, the T-Rex, based on all the archaeological evidence that they had, they built the model, they built the skeletal, they started to make the T-Rex walk in the way that we as scientists, or scientists at the time, thought the T-Rexes walked based on the movies that we had seen of Ray Harryhausen and all that. The problem was this: the artists and the technicians working on the dinosaur, the T-Rex, quickly realized that the biology of that creature couldn't support the way our common notion of how a T-Rex walked. So here was an example of cinema emerging at the forefront of its tech, contributing back to science by saying, no, it's physically impossible for dinosaurs, the T-Rexes, to stand upright and walk with the tail dragging behind them. They had to bend over, and here's the musculature and ambulatory motion that supports that thesis. So that's an example of where tech pushes and brings science up to where our visual imagination was at that time. Now, with the advent of Avatar and Life of Pi, the problem is this: we can now do anything, right? At the time, 1994, when Jurassic Park was made, we're still doing combination of miniatures, optical effects, a lot of compositing, and you had a digital creature in there for the first time. There are only like 70 shots in the whole movie. Some of those raptors were friends of mine, John Rosengrant, literally dressed in a suit, walking around and puppeteering that. And at the time, remember, nobody knew that the Velociraptor actually existed. It was a theory. It wasn't until 6 months later that they actually found the first evidence of a Velociraptor. But to your point now, where do we go with that? With Avatar, Life of Pi, we can do virtually anything. Now any image is a technical challenge. We've proved that we can create whole new worlds. We can create metaphysical worlds. We can create real worlds. We can create explosions. We can create armies of monkeys that attack humans. So where do we go with that? I don't know. It's a very good question. We still are, a lot of the proliferating. When I go back to your question earlier, there's so many movies out now. When you get companies like Marvel who make who have a universe, and they carefully craft, whether you like the films or not, whether you like the aesthetic of it, it's a different. You have to respect the fact that they carefully embed every single movie of theirs. They create a universe that crosses over multiple films, multiple decades, and they create a uniform look. You start to see in Doctor Strange, when we talk especially, this is a character who goes from the West back to the East, and what they did smartly from a narrative perspective was get through the training, Jedi student, learning story arc and got straight into him working his magic and bringing that part of the East world back to the West. So, best way I can answer that. It's still, there will be lag time. And a part of it is as we discover, our company just hired, speaking of Elon Musk, we just hired away his head, the head of rocket simulation, and this gentleman is working with us, simulating mist and foam as it comes off of waves, ocean swells as they hit lagoons, for Avatar. But he's in that exploration. His team I suspect we'll find out. We'll find some type of detail in that exploration, that visualization that will be then fed back to the scientific community. So.
There's a question here. Thanks.
Well, I'm sure you've heard this plenty of times, but how was your first experience kind of getting your foot in the door of the film industry as a whole?
How was it?
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of go through your beginning. I'm going to just say this. For all of you who want to get in the film business, it's fun. It's hard. It's challenging. My poor wife knows that I work countless hours during the week, and quite often I don't see her, and I've missed a number of birthdays and anniversaries that I ought not to have. But at the end of the day, making movies, making video games, making Game of Thrones, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But there's no true science in how to get ahead in this industry. A paralegal can go to New York and start working for a law firm. You work your way up, you do some cases, you defend, you become an associate partner, you become a partner. Professors, you graduate thesis done, you become an associate professor, you knock heads with a couple of deans, you get promoted, blah, blah, blah. In the movie business, I got my start, and this is, my career has been a series of accidental events. Just 4 years ago, I was with my family, literally in a valley in New Zealand, New Year's Eve, celebrating with Jim Cameron and all of his friends. And I literally turned to my wife and said, had you told me 10 years ago I'd be here and this day doing this, I wouldn't have believed you. Because there's no career trajectory that tells you in the entertainment industry where you ought to go. All I can tell you is this. Things happen, and you have to be ready to take advantage of it. How I got my start was on an independent film. It was an Italian film that was shooting in the Quad Cities. And I was fresh out of college, just graduated, and they said, hey, you want to go be a production assistant on a movie? And I said, this is awesome. First job, straight out of college, hitting it big. $100 a week, or it was $600 a week. My first job was to paint a classroom. The art director says, here's a paintbrush, here's a bucket of paint this classroom. And it was in some school down in, so there I sat. I started painting. I'm painting. Nobody showed up. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm painting this room. And by Thursday, I'm like, I think this is a scam. Because nobody's here, nobody says anything, I have no idea. Friday, I'm just like, okay, this is, all right, I'm done. Around the corner, I hear footsteps and murmuring, and all these people start coming around, and I realize, oh, and I see the filmmakers, and it's clearly a scout. I didn't know what the term was at the time, but I could tell a lot of talking, and they were coming to see my painted schoolroom. As there was this upscale fight going on, blah, 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 producer looks at me and said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm painting, I'm the PA for the art department painting this room. And he's like, no, you're not, no more. You're gonna be the assistant to the lead actress on the movie. Okay. I work with the lead actress on this movie. I do 1, 2 movies with her. And then one day, just quite by accident, I end up in Chicago with them, and I accidentally land up getting an interview on what I thought was gonna be a movie for John Hughes. But as I'm interviewing the guy, he's talking to me about, hey, how well do you organize vinegar? Do you know your wines? Do you know gum? Do you know M&Ms? And I realized that I then was like, oh, wait, I'm not going to actually work on a movie, am I? He's like, no, I want you to be the trailer boy for John Hughes. Opportunity, took advantage of it. It was the weirdest job ever, but guess what? I sat there in the trailer and made it nice and organized. I made it nice and neat. Nobody ever asked me my opinion about anything, but there I was. I had the cigarettes down. I had the M&Ms down. I had the candy down. I had it all, you know. When I saw him walking, I opened the door before, so he never actually had to spend any time opening the door. He was just, you know. You know what that led to? One night, John Candy and John Hughes are writing a script together, and they say, oh, can you do one last thing? Go grab me 2 cartons of cigarettes. So I go down to the Quick Trip or whatever it was, got 2 cartons of cigarettes, come back. John Candy says to me, hey, why don't you just hang out? Okay. Hung out with him, and we started watching a variety of comedies and a variety of movies. And just like that, somebody said, here, read a script. Tell me what you think. And in that moment, that's when I made it. Because what I did was able to go home, I read that script, and I was able to write what's called a log line. And that is the only way you ever do that is you understand how to read texts and how to read scripts and how to read books. More importantly, then you have to learn how to write about them. I was able to write a very distinct summary about why this script sucked. And I gave it back to him the very next day. And after that, John looked at it and he said, okay, you're going to go move. And I moved into a completely different realm. And it's literally, I could tell you my entire career has been a series of accidents like that. Moments that come to you, and you have to be ready to take advantage of them. And at the core foundation is reading, writing, and watching. It's really, really the core success. So.
It's just music to my ears. I'm going to engrave it on stone. Okay. Oh dear. We are past 4:30, and I suppose that we are going to have to wind this down, which is a real shame. I would like to thank everybody for coming today, and I want to extend my sincerest appreciation to David Conley for your incredible generosity in sharing your wisdom and experiences with everyone here at the University of Iowa. Thank you so much.